He kicked her out into the cold while she was still bleeding. Not metaphorically, not in argument. Quietly, the way Garrett Whitmore did everything that mattered, he told his wife of 7 years to take what she needed and find somewhere else to be. It was 41 degrees in Beaumont, Texas. Their son Isaiah was 6 weeks old and strapped against Nadia's chest. Her cesarean incision was not yet fully healed, and Garrett stood in the doorway of the home she had kept, his mother Cecile visible behind him in the hallway like a co-signature, and he closed the door before her car reached the street. What he did not know, what nobody standing in that warm-lit house could have known, was that 9 days earlier, Nadia had sat in a Beaumont attorney's office and quietly become the sole trustee of a land holding worth $1.8 billion, 11,400 acres of Jefferson County, Texas. Mineral rights, surface deeds, the exact ground that Garrett's development firm had been negotiating to build on for over a year. He put the woman who owned his future out into 41-degree air and watched her taillights disappear. Inside the house, a woman named Renata stood in Nadia's kitchen holding Nadia's cup. This is not just a story about a husband who underestimated his wife. It's a story about what happens when a man spends years trying to make a woman feel like nothing, without ever once asking what she was holding. If you believe that quiet strength is its own kind of power, hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel is built for people who understand that. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. Now, what's to understand what really happened on that February night? We need to go back to where this story was actually born. To understand what happened that February night, we need to go back to where this story was actually born. But first, the night itself. All of it. The suitcase had wheels, which was the only mercy. Nadia gripped the handle with her right hand and kept her left pressed flat against Isaiah's back, feeling the rise and fall of him through the carrier fabric, counting his breaths the way she had every night since they brought him home from Beaumont General 6 weeks ago. The incision across her lower abdomen pulled with each step, not sharp, more like a reminder, her body's way of keeping inventory of everything it had recently survived. She did not look back at the house. She had learned in 7 years of marriage to Garrett Whitmore that looking back was how he measured his effect on her. She would not give him the measurement. The night air settled against her face the moment she cleared the porch overhang, cold and honest in the way February in East Texas sometimes managed, the temperature having dropped through the afternoon without announcement. 41 degrees. She knew because she had checked before coming downstairs, the way she always checked, the way her mother had taught her to know the conditions before she stepped into them. Know the ground before you walk it, Nadia. Know what's underneath. She pressed the key fob. The car unlocked with a sound like a small domestic exhale. Inside the house, the door had already closed. She heard it, the latch catching, the particular finality of a deadbolt she had not been given the opportunity to turn herself. Through the front window, she could see the warm amber of the living room light. Cecile moved past it, heading toward the kitchen. Unhurried. Already making tea, probably. Already settling into the space she had been measuring for months, testing its dimensions, deciding which rooms needed adjusting. Nadia put the suitcase in the trunk. She adjusted Isaiah's carrier without looking at the house. She got in the car. She drove. What Garrett did not know, what he had no reason to consider standing in his warm hallway while his mother moved efficiently toward his kitchen, was that 9 days earlier, Nadia had sat in the Beaumont offices of Treadwell and Marsh Estate Law on Calder Avenue and become, in the span of 45 quiet minutes, the sole trustee of the Osage Land Trust, 11,400 acres of Jefferson County, Texas. Surface deeds, mineral rights, verified beneath the ground by a geological survey commissioned by the Gulf Coast Energy Consortium, a Houston-based collective of investors and developers who had assessed those acres at $1.8 billion. The consortium was currently in active negotiation with Whitmore Land Partners, LLC, for access rights to the Jefferson County Development Corridor. Had been for 14 months. The land they needed sat in Nadia's name, had sat there patiently for 40 years, assembled parcel by a woman who understood that the most valuable things rarely announce themselves. Garrett had put his son into 41-degree air without knowing he was evicting his only path to the biggest deal of his career. The irony was precise. It would take him 3 weeks to understand its full dimensions. The Hampton Inn on Interstate 10 had a ground floor room available, which mattered because of the suitcase in the carrier and the fact that Nadia was 6 weeks post-cesarean and had already asked more of her body tonight than she had planned. The woman at the front desk, a young woman whose name tag read Destiny, did not ask questions. She handed over the key card and said the ice machine was around the corner if she needed it. Nadia thanked her and meant it. The room smelled of neutral things, clean surfaces, conditioned air. She settled Isaiah into the center of the bed, building a border of pillows with the automatic efficiency of a woman who had done it 100 times in 100 uncertain configurations. He stirred once, then stilled. His small chest rose, fell, rose. Nadia sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. Garrett had sent one message. It read, "I hope you understand this is the right thing for everyone." She set the phone face down. There was a missed call, time-stamped 3 days ago, from a number she recognized without needing to check the contact name. Dr. Claudine Arsenault. Senior partner, Arsenault and Partners, Houston. Her mother's attorney for 19 years. The woman who had called twice in the weeks after Lydia's death, both times reaching a voicemail box that Nadia had checked and reported to Garrett as estate logistics. Nothing requiring her immediate attention. She had believed him. She had been grieving, and she had believed him. She did not call Claudine back. Not yet. Something in her recognized that the call she was about to make needed to come from a different place than this one, this numb, fluorescent-lit, still bleeding place. It needed to come from somewhere steadier. She set the phone on the nightstand. She lay down beside Isaiah. She pressed her palm flat against the mattress, the way she always did when she needed to feel something solid beneath her. And she listened to her son breathe in the dark. She did not cry. She did not sleep either. She lay in the dark and felt, beneath the exhaustion and the cold she hadn't quite shaken and the dull pull of the incision, something her mother would have recognized immediately. A kind of settling, the way ground feels after the water table rises. Heavier, more itself, not the absence of pain, something older than pain. But to understand what that feeling was and where it came from, we need to go back further still. Back to the woman who built what Nadia was only beginning to understand she was carrying. Lydia Ossie did not buy her first parcel of Jefferson County land because she was wealthy. She bought it because she understood something that wealthy people rarely do, that value and visibility are not the same thing. It was 1983. She was 31 years old, newly credentialed as an environmental geologist, driving county roads in a used Datsun pickup with soil core samples rattling in the truck bed and a topographic survey folded across the passenger seat. The land she was studying was flat and scrubby and largely ignored, the kind of terrain that real estate men drove past without slowing down. Lydia did not drive past it. She pulled over, walked the edges of a 14-acre parcel outside of China, Texas, pressed her boot into the soil, and understood what was beneath it in the way that geologists understand things, not as a guess, but as a reading. She bought that parcel for $11,000 from a family who was relieved to sell it. Over the next 40 years, she bought 63 more. She never discussed the purchases with neighbors. She never applied for development permits, never commissioned public surveys, never attended county planning meetings. She simply acquired, parcel by parcel, whenever the numbers aligned and the owners were willing, until the hand-drawn map above the kitchen window, updated in pencil every time a new deed was filed, stretched across all four corners of the frame. Nadia grew up with that map the way other children grew up with family photographs. It was simply there, present. Part of the kitchen the way the window itself was part of the kitchen. She was 16 the afternoon she finally asked about it. Lydia was washing field equipment at the sink, her back to the room, when Nadia pointed at a cluster of parcels in the map's southeast corner and asked why she never fought back when old Mr. Devereaux from 3 roads over told anyone who would listen that her mother was buying up useless land and wasting a perfectly good education. Lydia turned off the tap, dried her hands slowly on a dish towel, looked at the map for a moment before she answered. "The land doesn't argue with anyone," she said. "It just stays." She went back to the dishes, and somehow at 16, Nadia understood that this was not a small piece of advice. It was a complete philosophy. She just didn't know yet how far it would have to carry her. The legal architecture came later, quietly, the way Lydia did everything that mattered. In 2014, 3 years before Nadia married Garrett Whitmore, Lydia retained the Beaumont firm of Treadwell and Marsh to establish the Osei Land Trust as a separate property vehicle. Nadia's name as sole trustee, assets titled independently of any future marriage, transfer conditions sealed until Nadia's possession was confirmed in writing by the estate attorney. When Nadia signed the foundational documents that year, Lydia described them simply as family estate paperwork. The kind of thing you signed so the lawyers had what they needed. Nadia trusted her. She initialed where the tabs indicated and returned to Houston for a job site meeting and didn't think about it again. She didn't know the trust held 64 parcels totaling 11,400 acres. She didn't know that a geological survey, commissioned 15 years earlier by a Midland-based energy firm, had flagged the Jefferson County corridor as a high-probability natural gas formation. She didn't know that Lydia had kept that survey report in a fireproof lockbox under the bedroom floorboard since 2009. She didn't know any of it, and Lydia never told her, because Lydia believed that some things were better received as inheritance than as instruction. Now, here is what the audience needs to hold on to, because this is where the story's irony becomes almost unbearable. In the spring of 2022, the Gulf Coast Energy Consortium commissioned their own independent mineral survey of Jefferson County. Their results confirmed what Lydia's lockbox had known for over a decade. The corridor was significant. The rights were worth acquiring. The consortium began identifying landowners and initiating contact. One of the firms they contacted about surface access rights was Whitmore Land Partners, LLC, a Beaumont-based development company whose founder, Garrett Whitmore, had been pitching Jefferson County as an emerging commercial corridor for nearly 2 years. He had relationships with county commissioners. He had architectural renderings. He had a presentation deck. What he did not have, what he had no reason to imagine he would ever need, was his wife's signature. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. When Nadia first brought Garrett to the house on Calder Street, Lydia shook his hand at the door, offered him coffee, and was pleasant for the entire evening. She noticed the way he looked around the kitchen, a quick inventory, the glance of a man who assessed rooms for what they were worth. She noticed he didn't look at the map above the window for more than a second. She didn't say anything. She did, however, call her attorney the next morning. The early marriage was real. Nadia wants that understood, or at least the narrator wants it on record, because the cruelty that came later only lands with its full weight if you understand what preceded it. Garrett in those first years was present in the way that mattered. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He showed up to her project site reviews and stood in muddy boots holding architectural drawings with genuine curiosity. He loved her the way ambitious men sometimes love their first calm place, completely and temporarily. The scene at Treadwell and Marsh on Calder Avenue happened on a Thursday morning in early February, 9 days before the driveway, 3 days after Lydia's burial. Nadia sat across from the estate attorney, a measured man named Howard Treadwell, who had known her mother for 20 years and had the careful stillness of someone about to hand a person something very heavy. He set the trust summary on the table. He explained the asset schedule. He said the figure, $1.8 billion, confirmed valuation as of the consortium's December survey, in the same tone one might use to describe square footage. Nadia pressed her palm flat against the edge of the table. She did not speak for a long moment. Outside the window, a city bus moved along Calder Avenue. Someone was eating lunch on a bench across the street. The world continued, indifferent to what had just shifted inside a quiet office in Beaumont, Texas. "She never told me," Nadia said finally. Not as an accusation, as an acknowledgement. Howard Treadwell nodded once. "She said you'd understand when you needed to." The marriage Garrett thought he was dismantling had been built on ground he never once looked down to examine. The marriage Lydia anticipated was not the marriage Nadia got. But the difference didn't arrive all at once. It arrived the way erosion does. Grain by grain, so gradually that you keep looking at the same landscape and telling yourself it hasn't changed. The first year was genuinely good. Nadia wants that on record, and the narrator obliges. Garrett was present. He came home. He asked about her landscape architecture projects with the specific curiosity of a man who was actually listening, not performing listening. And there is a difference Nadia knew how to feel. He brought her coffee before she asked for it. He remembered that she took it with cardamom, the way her mother made it, and the fact that he remembered felt like being seen. Then something shifted, slowly, the way a house settles, no single crack you can point to, just a gradual sense that the floors are no longer quite level. It began with the paperwork. Garrett had always been efficient about administrative things, which Nadia initially received as helpfulness. When envelopes arrived from Treadwell and Marsh in the months after the trust was established, he would gather them from the mailbox with the rest of the household mail and set them on his desk to sort through. When she asked about them, he would summarize estate processing, still pending, nothing that needed her attention yet. He used the word bandwidth once when explaining why she shouldn't worry about it during the pregnancy. Her bandwidth was needed elsewhere, he said. He would handle it. She let him, because Lydia had just received her diagnosis, and Nadia was spending every other weekend driving to the hospital on Doolin Road and sitting in rooms that smelled of disinfectant and trying to memorize her mother's hands. She did not have bandwidth. That part was true. What she did not know, what she had no reason to suspect, was that Garrett had set up a P.O. box at the Postnet on College Street and had begun rerouting her estate correspondence there 7 months into this arrangement. Every letter from Claudine Arsenault, every trust status update, every document requiring Nadia's awareness, redirected, quietly. The way he did everything that mattered. He didn't notice how often she reached for those letters. He didn't notice because he had stopped watching her reach for things. The dismissals at dinner were next. Not arguments. Garrett did not argue. He redirected. If Nadia mentioned a concern about the estate timeline, he would pivot to something happening with Whitmore Land Partners, a deal developing in Jefferson County, a consortium he'd been in talks with, the particular energy of a man building towards something large. His enthusiasm was real. She understood that his work mattered to him the way her mother's land had mattered to Lydia. She extended patience accordingly. It was the only framework she had. Then Cecile began appearing. Garrett's mother had always been a quarterly presence. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional Sunday. But in the 14th month of the marriage, when Nadia's pregnancy was beginning to show in the soft rounding of her belly beneath her work shirts, Cecile started arriving on Tuesdays, sometimes Wednesdays, always unannounced, always with a casserole dish and a comment delivered in the tone of genuine concern. "You're carrying so differently than I expected," she said one afternoon, looking at Nadia's midsection with her head tilted. "Have you spoken to the doctor about the weight?" Nadia had spoken to the doctor. The doctor had said everything was exactly as it should be. She said this. Cecile nodded in the way that meant she had heard and disagreed, but would not press. Not today. She set the casserole dish on the counter, rearranged 3 things in the kitchen without asking, and went to find Garrett in his office. They talked for 40 minutes with the door half closed. Nadia could hear the low register of their voices, but not the words. This became a pattern. Garrett and Cecile formed across those Tuesday visits a conversational unit with its own grammar and its own shorthand. And Nadia found herself on the outside of it, not through any dramatic exclusion, but through the accumulation of closed doors and redirected subjects, and the particular silence that falls when 2 people stop talking the moment a third person enters the room. She told herself it was grief, hers, traveling sideways into suspicion. She told herself it was the pregnancy hormones the books all warned about. She extended more patience because Lydia had taught her that stillness was not passivity, and she was trying to practice the lesson. Even when practicing, it felt like being asked to hold very still while something moved around her in the dark. Then came the name. It was a Tuesday in October, 7 months before the driveway. Garrett had forwarded her a work email in error, a chain involving subcontract bids for a commercial site in Harris County. She was scrolling through it looking for something she'd thought he'd forwarded intentionally when she saw, 4 messages deep, a line from a sender named Renata Voss. The message was professional. The sign-off was not. It read, "Talk later." The italics were in the original. Nadia set the phone face down on the kitchen table. She sat for a moment. Then she picked it back up, scrolled to the name, looked at it for exactly as long as she needed to, and set the phone down again. She did not confront him. She did not search his phone. She filed the name the way her mother had filed geological surveys, carefully, without urgency, in a place she knew she could find it again. It was around this time that Garrett mentioned, gently, that he was concerned about her anxiety. The pregnancy stress, Lydia's illness, the estate complexity, it was a lot. He knew a therapist, a good one. Highly recommended. His name was Aaron Fenwick, and his office was on 11th Street, and he came very well regarded. Nadia agreed, because she was not certain, in that October, that the unnamed heaviness she carried every day was not something that warranted professional attention. She was a woman trying to be fair to everyone, including herself. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Fenwick's office. What she did not know, what the audience knows now, and what will matter enormously later, was that Aaron Fenwick and Garrett Whitmore had shared a dorm room at the University of Texas at Austin for 2 years. They had not disclosed this to each other's wives, to licensing boards, or to anyone who might have had a reason to find it relevant. Nadia drove to 11th Street the following Thursday and sat across from a man who seemed genuinely warm and asked thoughtful questions and wrote things down in a yellow legal pad in careful professional handwriting. She answered honestly. She always answered honestly. It was the one habit of her mother's she had never once tried to modify. She went home that evening and made dinner and waited for Garrett to ask how it had gone. He didn't ask. He was on his phone, the screen angled slightly away, and when she looked across the table at him, he was already somewhere else entirely. She said nothing. She kept the name Renata Voss in a quiet room at the back of her mind, and she waited, and she continued to believe, because she was who she was, that patience was still the right response, that stillness would hold, that the ground beneath her was stable. She would not believe that for much longer. The card declined on a Tuesday morning in September. Nadia was at the Kroger on Dowlen Road, 6 months pregnant, a basket over one arm, and Isaiah's future pressed against the inside of her ribs. She had reached for the usual things: cardamom for her coffee, soup stock, the specific brand of crackers that were the only things she could eat before noon without her stomach turning. The cashier, a teenager named Brianna, whose name tag was slightly crooked, ran the card and looked at the screen, and then looked at Nadia with the particular apologetic expression of someone who has delivered this news before. "It's declined," Brianna said. "You want to try a different one?" Nadia did not have a different one. The joint account was the account. She had not had her own account since the second year of the marriage. When Garrett had suggested, reasonably and with a detailed spreadsheet, that consolidating their finances would simplify things considerably. She had agreed because simplifying things had seemed, at the time, like a form of partnership. She paid with the cash she kept in her coat pocket for parking meters and carried the basket to the car and sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes before starting the engine. That evening, Garrett explained it as an account restructuring, a temporary administrative change at Beaumont First National. The joint accounts authorization hierarchy had been adjusted while he set up a new business sub-account. Nothing to worry about. He would add her back as a primary card holder within the week. He said all of this while scrolling through something on his laptop, not looking up, and used the word temporary twice, which Nadia noted without comment. He did not add her back within the week. He added her back as a secondary authorized user, a distinction that meant the account required his approval for transfers above $200. He did not explain this distinction. She discovered it 3 weeks later when she tried to move money for a contractor estimate on a small landscaping consultation she was considering, a first step back toward the work she had set aside, and the transfer was flagged. She did not mention it to Garrett. She was not certain, in that season, that she had the ground beneath her to stand on while she argued. What was happening behind that ground, what the audience now needs to understand fully, was this. For 7 months since early spring, Garrett had been collecting Nadia's estate correspondence from the mailbox before she reached it. Letters from Claudine Arsenault's office at Arsenault and Partners in Houston, trust status updates, documents requiring Nadia's awareness regarding the Osei Land Trust's mineral rights verification progress. Every envelope addressed to Nadia Osei Whitmore in the firm's clean serif letterhead was removed from the stack, carried to his car, and driven to a postnet on College Street where he maintained a private P.O. box under a business services account registered to Whitmore Land Partners, LLC. Nadia had not heard from Claudine in 7 months. She assumed the estate was still processing. Estates took time. She had been told this by the one brief phone call she'd managed before the correspondence stopped, and she had no reason to question it. She trusted the process because she had been taught to trust steady ground. She didn't know the ground had been moved. Garrett reviewed the intercepted letters with the methodical attention of a man reading contracts, which in a sense he was. He understood from the correspondence that the Osei Land Trust existed. He understood it was a separate property vehicle. What he did not understand, because Claudine's letters were status updates, not full asset disclosures, was the scope, the dollar figure, the mineral rights, the consortium's involvement. He knew Nadia had an inheritance. He believed it was modest. He had no reason to believe otherwise because Lydia had kept her ledger exactly as she had kept everything else. Underground. The irony of it is almost impossible to hold. He was intercepting letters about $1 billion trust in order to protect his position in a negotiation that trust would obliterate. He was that close to the truth, and that far. Isaiah was born in December by emergency cesarean after 18 hours of labor that left Nadia pale and exhausted and more physically present in her own body than she had ever been. She held him for the first time with arms that trembled from the effort of the previous day, and something settled in her chest that nothing in the marriage had put there, something that was not Garrett's and never would be. Cecile moved into the guest room 2 days after they came home from the hospital. She framed it as helping. She told 3 visitors in the first week that Nadia was struggling. She did not ask Nadia before she told them this. She told Dr. Fenwick's receptionist, when she called to reschedule Nadia's postpartum appointment, that Nadia had been having a difficult time managing. She rearranged the bassinet placement in the bedroom without asking. When Nadia moved it back, Cecile mentioned at dinner that evening that she had read an article about optimal sleep positioning for newborns, and perhaps Nadia should review it. She did not lower her voice. Garrett ate his dinner and said nothing. The session notes were the part Nadia never knew about until it was too late to matter in the way it might have. Dr. Fenwick had been filing notes since August. They described a patient presenting with what he termed memory inconsistency. She would reference events from prior sessions differently each time, he noted, suggesting difficulty with factual sequencing. He noted emotional dysregulation in 2 sessions following her mother's hospitalization, and difficulty maintaining linear narrative in 3 subsequent appointments. The language was clinical, precise, and devastating in its neutrality. It read as objective because it was written by a man with credentials and a yellow legal pad and 19 years of professional practice. Garrett had reviewed copies of all of it. His family law attorney, a man named Patrick Brevard, with offices on Calder Avenue, had been briefed accordingly. Nadia overheard the word documentation from the hallway outside the kitchen one evening in January, 3 weeks after Isaiah's birth. Garrett was on the phone with someone she couldn't identify. He said, "We have documentation of her instability if the custody question becomes relevant." Then he laughed at something the other person said. Then he lowered his voice. She stood in the hallway with Isaiah against her chest, her incisions still pulling with each step, her full weight on both feet. She did not move for a long moment. Something inside her contracted, not loudly and not in a way anyone would have seen, but completely, as though a door she hadn't known was open had just, very quietly, been closed. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in February, Garrett found her in the kitchen after dinner and told her, in the same measured cadence he used for quarterly projections, that it might be best for everyone if she rested somewhere else for a while. 3 days after that, he made sure she did. The night of the driveway was a Thursday. That detail matters because Thursdays had been, for most of their marriage, the one evening Garrett came home early. He had established this as a kind of domestic gesture in the early years. Thursday dinners, the 2 of them, no phones at the table. Nadia had cooked for it, had kept the habit even after the habit stopped meaning anything to him, because she was the kind of person who honored the architecture of a thing long after its occupant had left. She had not cooked that Thursday. She was 6 weeks postpartum and still measuring her days in increments her body would allow. An hour upright, a feed, a slow walk to the kitchen and back. She had been sitting with Isaiah in the nursing chair by the bedroom window when she heard the front door open in Garrett's voice, lower than usual, and then Cecile's answering murmur, and then a silence that had a different quality than ordinary silence. More prepared. She recognized it the way you recognize a change in air pressure before a storm. When she came downstairs, they were both in the entryway. Garrett was standing with his coat still on. Beside him, against the wall, was a rolling suitcase she recognized. The navy one she kept in the hallway closet for overnight trips. It was already packed. The zipper was closed. He had done this while she was upstairs. He had gone into their bedroom, opened her drawers, made decisions about what she would need, packed them into her bag, and zipped it shut without asking her a single question. She looked at the suitcase. She looked at him. "It's not working," Garrett said. His voice was even. It was always even, which was how she had learned to dread evenness. "I need you to stay somewhere else while we figure out the next steps. This will be better for Isaiah. It'll be better for everyone." Cecile stepped forward slightly. Not in front of Garrett, just adjacent. A half step that said, "I am here and I agree, and there is no version of this conversation you can redirect." "Garrett has spoken to Dr. Fenwick," Cecile said. Her voice was pitched at the register she used for difficult truths that require gentleness. "And he's reached out to Dr. Priya Mehta at the pediatric practice to make sure Isaiah is properly supported during this transition. Everything is arranged." She paused. "We just need you to be somewhere you can focus on getting well, Nadia." Getting well, as though the problem were medical, as though she were the variable that required correction. She wanted to say something. She could feel the words forming, a full sentence, a real one, something that said, "I have kept this house. I have kept this child. I have stayed through every closed door and every redirected question and every Tuesday with your mother rearranging my kitchen, and you packed a bag for me while I was upstairs." But she looked at Garrett's face, that prepared evenness, that forward lean of a man who had already rehearsed every possible response. And she understood that the sentence would not land. It would be absorbed. It would become evidence. She pressed her palm flat against the entryway wall for one breath. Then she picked up the suitcase handle with her right hand and kept her left over Isaiah's head in the carrier. The cold hit her immediately when she stepped onto the porch. 41 degrees. She had checked the weather that morning. Force of habit, know the conditions before you step into them. Isaiah stirred against her chest. She pulled the carrier fabric tighter. Across the street, the porch light of the Devereaux Holt house was on. Linda Holt was standing just inside her screen door. Nadia could see the pale shape of her through the mesh. She was watching. She did not come out. She did not call across. She watched from behind her screen with the particular stillness of a person who has decided that whatever is happening across the street is not their problem to involve themselves in. Nadia did not look at her for long. The suitcase wheels caught on the driveway seam, and she had to jerk it free. The motion pulled at the incision. Not sharply, more like a reminder, the same persistent accounting her body had kept every day for 6 weeks. She kept moving. She opened the trunk. She lifted the suitcase in without help, which cost her something she did not show. She settled Isaiah's carrier, confirmed the buckle, got into the driver's seat. She did not look back at the house. Then something made her glance up. Just once. Through the front window, visible past the amber warmth of the living room lamp, a figure moved in the kitchen. A woman she did not know, moving with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in the space. Opening a cabinet, taking down a cup, the particular posture of a person who has been rehearsing belonging for long enough that it no longer feels like performance. Renata Voss did not look toward the window. She poured hot water from the kettle. She stood with one hip resting against Nadia's kitchen counter, in Nadia's kitchen, in the home Nadia had kept for 7 years. The front door closed. Garrett had not waited to watch her go. Nadia started the car. She backed out of the driveway slowly, the way she always did, the way her mother had taught her. No sudden movements on unstable ground. The streetlights came on as she reached the road, triggered by the falling dark, and she drove toward them. The Hampton Inn was 12 minutes away. She knew because she had driven it before, in a different life, on the way to somewhere else. She checked in with Isaiah against her shoulder, and a credit card she hoped would clear. The personal one Garrett had not yet thought to touch. And Destiny at the front desk handed her a key card and said the ice machine was around the corner. The room was on the ground floor. She settled Isaiah on the bed. She sat down beside him. Her phone showed one missed call from earlier in the week. Dr. Claudine Arsenault, time-stamped 3 days ago, when Nadia had seen it and told herself she would call back when she had the presence for it. She looked at the name for a long time. Something moved in her that had no word for it yet. Not a decision, not quite. More like the moment before a decision. The moment when the body understands something slightly before the mind does and goes very, very still. She did not call back. Not tonight. But she did not set the phone face down either. She placed it on the nightstand, screen up, Claudine's name where she could see it, and she lay down beside her son in the dark. Tomorrow, something in her knew. Tomorrow. She woke before Isaiah. This had become a small daily measure of recovery, waking first, having one undemanded moment before the need began. She lay still in the unfamiliar room and listened to his breathing and watched the thin bar of morning light under the curtain edge and waited for herself to arrive fully. The divorce papers were on the nightstand. They had been delivered the previous afternoon by a courier from Patrick Brevard's office on Calder Avenue, slid under the hotel room door in a manila envelope while she was nursing Isaiah so that she heard the envelope scrape the threshold but did not go to pick it up for 20 minutes. She had read them once, sitting on the edge of the bed with Isaiah asleep against her shoulder, and then set them face down on the nightstand where they had remained. She was not thinking about the papers. She was thinking about her coat. She had draped it over the desk chair when she checked in, and sometime in the early morning, before she was fully awake, she had reached for it to cover her feet against the hotel room chill. She was pulling it back onto the bed when something in the inside pocket shifted. A faint rustle, the particular sound of folded paper moving. She reached in. Her fingers found the edge of something familiar before her eyes had adjusted enough to see it. She knew the paper's weight before she unfolded it. She knew the pencil lines before she held it to the light. It was a photocopy of the parcel map, a small one, half the size of the original, folded into quarters and tucked inside a pocket she had not checked since October. Lydia's handwriting in the corner, the same careful notation she used for geological surveys. Osage Land Trust, Jefferson County, TX, current as of November 2022. And below that, in handwriting slightly less steady than the rest, the diagnosis had already been progressing then. A single line that was not a label and was not a coordinate, just words. The way Lydia always left what mattered. The land doesn't argue with anyone. It just stays. Nadia sat with it for a long time. She had heard the line at 16, pointing at the map above the kitchen window, and she had understood it as philosophy. She had heard it again in the months after the diagnosis when she drove to Dallin Road Hospital and sat in rooms that smelled of disinfectant, her mother's hands in hers, and she had understood it as comfort. Now, in a hotel room in Beaumont with divorce papers on the nightstand and a 6-week-old son asleep on her chest and 41 degrees still somewhere under her skin, she understood it for the third and final time. It was not philosophy. It was not comfort. It was a description of power, of what power actually looked like when it was real and not performed. It did not shout. It did not argue. It did not justify itself to the people who underestimated it. It simply continued to exist and to hold and to wait for the moment when visibility became unavoidable. Lydia had not built 11,400 acres of Jefferson County land because she needed anyone to know about it. She had built it because she understood that the ground does not require an audience. And Nadia, who had spent 7 years qualifying her sentences and measuring her responses and extending patience long past the point at which patience was being received as love, understood now that she had been practicing a version of that same principle without knowing its full name. She had stayed. She had held. She had not argued with the walls closing around her, because arguing with walls had never been the way to move them. But staying was not the same as accepting. And that this morning, with her mother's handwriting in her lap and the divorce papers face down on the nightstand, was the thing she finally understood the difference between. Isaiah made a small sound against her shoulder. She pressed her palm flat against his back, feeling the warmth of him, the particular trust of a sleeping child who does not yet know that the world is capable of this particular variety of carelessness. Her hand steadied. She picked up her phone. She called Claudine Arsenault. "I've been waiting," Claudine said. No preamble, no pleasantries, just those 3 words, and then silence. And Nadia understood that Lydia had chosen this woman with the same precision she had chosen everything. They met 2 hours later at the Blue Willow Diner on 11th Street, a corner booth, a Friday morning, the place half full with the quiet industry of people on their lunch break. Claudine arrived first. She was already seated when Nadia came through the door with Isaiah in the carrier, and she stood to hold the booth while Nadia settled. And then she sat back down and set her pen flat on the table and waited. Nadia told her what had happened. She did it without hedging and without qualification and without the particular vocal flinch she had developed over 7 years of marriage to a man who used her uncertainty against her. She stated facts. She stated them in the order they occurred. She was finished in 4 minutes. Claudine picked up her pen, set it down again. "The trust documentation is complete," Claudine said. "The mineral rights verification was filed with the Gulf Coast Energy Consortium in January. As of their last survey, the confirmed valuation is $1.8 billion. A pause. "The consortium has a summit scheduled in Houston in 3 weeks. Whitmore Land Partners is presenting the Jefferson County development proposal on the 2nd day." The room did not go silent. People ate their lunches. A server refilled coffee 2 tables over. The world continued its ordinary business, entirely indifferent to what was shifting in that corner booth. Nadia looked at the folded parcel map she had set on the table between them. Her mother's handwriting in the corner, the pencil lines she had studied all her life. She looked at it for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she looked at Claudine. "He put my son out in the cold," she said. Her voice was level, completely level. The voice of a woman who has stopped asking permission. "I want every acre documented by Friday." Claudine set her pen down flat on the table. She reached for her briefcase. "Then we have work to do," she said. 3 weeks later, in a ballroom in Houston, 40 people learned what the ground beneath Garrett Whitmore's entire career had always been made of. But that, finally, is the part this story has been waiting to tell. The Gulf Coast Energy Consortium held its quarterly summit at the Magnolia Grand Hotel on McKinney Avenue in Houston. A ballroom on the 4th floor with high ceilings, a podium at the front, and 40 chairs arranged in 5 rows of 8. The chairs were the upholstered kind, the kind that signal to their occupants that the proceedings will be long and the stakes will be significant. By 9 in the morning, they were all occupied. Garrett arrived with Marcus at 8:45. He was dressed well, charcoal suit, the one he wore when he needed a room to take him seriously, and he carried a laptop bag and the particular forward energy of a man who had been building toward this moment for 14 months. He checked in at the registration table, received his presenter credentials, and found a seat in the front row beside Marcus while the earlier presenter finished. He did not scan the room carefully. He was focused. He was ready. He did not notice the tall woman seated at the far left of the 3rd row. He had no reason to. She was not presenting. She was not affiliated with any company he recognized from the agenda. She had arrived before him, settled into her chair with a leather briefcase across her knees, and set her pen flat on the armrest in a gesture so habitual it required no thought. Dr. Claudine Arsenault had been in this room, in rooms exactly like this one, for 30 years. She knew how to be present without being visible. Lydia had chosen her for precisely this quality, among others. Garrett's presentation slot was 10:15. He took the podium at 10:17, thanked the moderator, and opened his deck. Slide 1 was the Whitmore Land Partners Company overview. 7 years in operation, 4 completed commercial developments in the greater Beaumont and Harris County corridor, a track record he had built from nothing and was genuinely proud of. The room received it with the polite attention of people who had already read the summary documents. Slide 2 was the Jefferson County opportunity, projected growth corridor, infrastructure access, consortium partnership structure, the projected return on a $340 million development contract. He spoke with authority. He had given versions of this presentation to county commissioners, to bank loan officers, to partners who came and stayed, and partners who came and left. This was the version that was supposed to close everything. He advanced to slide 3. Slide 3 was the land map, Jefferson County in full, the development corridor highlighted in blue, the parcel boundaries overlaid in white. He had used this slide dozens of times. He knew every line of it. He opened his mouth to begin the access rights section. The consortium's lead counsel, a compact man named Richard Okafor, who sat at a small table to the left of the podium, raised his hand. Garrett stopped. "Mr. Whitmore," Okafor said. His voice was even, professional, the voice of a man delivering information, not judgment. "Before you continue, the consortium received a legal notice this morning. It's relevant to the land parcel you're currently displaying. I need to read it into the record." The room did not go silent all at once. It went quiet in stages. The rustling stopped first, then the low murmur of side conversations, then the ambient sound of 40 people deciding to pay close attention. Garrett stood at the podium with his hand still on the clicker and said nothing. Okafor opened a folder. He read without preamble. The notice stated that the surface rights and mineral rights to the Jefferson County Development Corridor, all 11,400 acres indicated in the Whitmore Land Partners presentation materials, parcels designated OLT-001 through OLT-064 in Jefferson County property records, were held in their entirety by a private instrument known as the Osai Land Trust, established under Texas separate property law, recorded with the Jefferson County Clerk's Office, and currently active. The trust officer of record was named. The name was Nadia Osei Whitmore. The room received this in complete silence. Garrett's hand came off the clicker. It was the only movement he made. His face did not change in any dramatic way. There was no flinch, no recoil. What happened was subtler and more total. Something behind his eyes went very still, the way a screen goes still when the signal drops. And in that stillness was the specific quality of a man beginning to understand the full geometry of what he had done. Not the shape of a mistake, the shape of an architecture, one that had been in place for years beneath everything he had built, waiting with the patience of a thing that does not argue. Claudine stood. She introduced herself to the room in 4 words. Her name, her firm. She set her briefcase on the table. Okafor had vacated and opened it. She removed 3 documents in sequence and placed them on the table with the unhurried precision of someone who has choreographed nothing, because nothing requires choreographing when the facts are this clean. The first document was the Osei Land Trust certification, the original instrument bearing Howard Treadwell's notary seal in a Jefferson County recording stamp dated 2014. The second was the Gulf Coast Energy Consortium's own mineral rights verification report from December, cross-referenced against the trust parcel schedule. Every acre matched, every boundary aligned. The corridor Garrett had been presenting as available for development had never at any point in the 14 months of his negotiations been his to offer. The third document she placed on the table without comment. It was a certified postal records report from the PostNet location on College Street in Beaumont, Texas, documenting the rental history of P.O. Box 447, registered to Whitmore Land Partners, LLC, opened in March of the prior year. Attached to it were photocopies of 7 envelopes, all addressed to Nadia Osei Whitmore, all bearing the Treadwell and Marsh return address, all stamped with forwarding notations that matched the P.O. Box dates. The report was accompanied by a statement from a forensic document specialist. Interference with trust correspondence, Claudine said simply, is a matter the consortium's legal team would want to review before any further proceedings. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Garrett while she spoke. 40 executives absorbed this. Some of them were writing, some were not. Marcus Thibault was in the 4th row, and somewhere between the second document and the third, he stopped writing and simply sat with his pen motionless over his legal pad and his eyes focused on the middle distance, doing the arithmetic that a practical man does when the numbers have stopped adding up in a recoverable direction. Okafor spoke again. He confirmed what the room had already understood. The $340 million development contract could not proceed without the written authorization of the Osei Land Trust officer. The consortium had not received such authorization. Until it did, all proceedings were suspended. Marcus stood. He excused himself to no one in particular. He walked to the door at a normal pace. Not rushing, because rushing would have required acknowledging what the pace was in response to, and left the room. He did not look at Garrett. He would file dissolution paperwork for Whitmore Land Partners LLC 41 hours later, and he would do it without a phone call, because Marcus Thibault was a practical man, and practical men do not place calls they have already calculated will not change the outcome. Garrett remained at the podium for a moment that lasted longer than it needed to. Then he stepped away from it. He found his seat in the front row. He sat down. The room continued around him, Okafor speaking, Claudine responding, documents changing hands. And Garrett sat in the middle of it with the posture of a man who has just understood, with full and irreversible clarity, that he has been negotiating against himself for 11 weeks. That the ground beneath his entire career was never his ground. That the woman he had packed a suitcase for, the woman he had sent into 41-degree air with a 6-week-old son and a clinical record he had commissioned to diminish her, had been holding every acre of it in her name the entire time. He thought about the map above the kitchen window. He had walked past it hundreds of times. He had never once stopped to read it. That evening, Renata received a text from Marcus. It contained 4 words and a dollar figure. She read it twice. Then she drove to the house on the quiet street in Beaumont and let herself in with the key Garrett had given her, and she moved through the rooms with the efficient composure of a woman who has always known exactly what she is there for and exactly when that arrangement has concluded. She packed 2 bags. She was gone before his car reached the highway outside Houston. She did not leave a note. She did not call. There was nothing in the house that belonged to her that she valued enough to come back for. Garrett called Nadia at 11:47 that night from the bar at the Magnolia Grand. She did not answer. He called again at 12:03. She did not answer. He set the phone face down on the bar and ordered something he did not finish, and sat in the amber light of a room full of strangers who had no idea what had just ended. He put my son out in the cold. I want every acre documented by Friday. She had said it quietly in a corner booth, over coffee she didn't finish, to a woman who had been waiting 19 years to execute it. She had not said it as a threat. She had not said it as a declaration. She had said it the way her mother had always spoken about the land, as a simple statement of what was true and what was next, and what would not be argued with. The land doesn't argue, it just stays. And it had. All 11,400 acres of it, patient beneath everything he had built, waiting for the morning when visibility became unavoidable. Garrett returned to Beaumont the morning after the summit on a highway he had driven 100 times, and the house looked exactly the same from the outside. Same beige trim, same live oak dropping leaves across the driveway, which made what he found inside worse somehow. Renata's things were gone. Not most of them, all of them. The bathroom counter was cleared to bare porcelain. The closet had space where her clothes had been, the hangers still there, pushed to one side with the particular indifference of someone who left in a practical frame of mind. She had taken the good coffee from the kitchen cabinet. She had not taken anything that was Nadia's. She understood, apparently, which things had always belonged to whom. Garrett stood in the kitchen for a while. Then he called his attorney. Patrick Brevard informed him, in the measured cadence of a lawyer delivering news he had known was coming, that the asset division proceedings would be significantly complicated by the OC Land Trust's separate property designation. The house, which carried a mortgage Garrett had taken in his name alone after the account restructuring, was subject to division. His 3 remaining equipment loans, held through a regional lender with consortium referral ties, were under review. Whitmore Land Partners LLC had already been dissolved. Marcus had filed the paperwork the previous afternoon without a phone call. There was no message. There was no explanation. There was only the filing date on a document Brevard read aloud, and the silence after. Garrett did not respond. He set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood in the space where 2 lives had been and understood, in the wordless way that total losses are understood, that there was nothing left here to manage. Cecile called Nadia on a Wednesday. The voicemail lasted 4 minutes and began with the words, "I didn't know about the land." She said it twice, in slightly different configurations, as though repetition would locate the absolution she was reaching for. She said she had been trying to help. She said she hoped Nadia could find it in her heart. She said Nadia's name 4 times. She said Isaiah's name once, near the end, in a voice that had lost its architecture. No tilt of the head, no hand briefly pressed to the arm, just the sound of a woman who had spent decades communicating through social access, discovering that the line had been disconnected. Nadia listened to the voicemail once. She did not call back. She did not delete it either. Claudine had advised keeping all communications, but she did not listen to it again. Dr. Aaron Fenwick received formal notification from the Texas State Board of Examiners of Psychologists in the third week of March. The complaint cited undisclosed dual relationships and documented evidence that session notes had been prepared in the coordination with a third party for use in family court proceedings. His notes on Nadia were reviewed by the family court judge assigned to the custody matter, declared inadmissible as compromised documentation, and struck from the record entirely. The custody determination that followed awarded primary conservatorship to Nadia, with Garrett granted supervised visitation pending the board's review. Fenwick receives no further narration. He has received exactly as much of this story as he deserves. Garrett appeared at Claudine's offices on Westheimer Road on a Thursday morning without an appointment. The receptionist, a composed young woman named Petra Molina, informed him that Ms. Arsenault was unavailable and that all communications regarding Nadia O.C. Whitmore must be directed through opposing counsel. He left a handwritten letter sealed in a plain envelope addressed to Nadia in care of the firm. Claudine forwarded it. Nadia read it that evening at the kitchen table. All 2 pages of it, the careful handwriting, the words that reached for something she recognized as genuine and something she recognized as too late. She read it once. She folded it along its original creases. She set it on the table beside her coffee cup. She did not respond. Not that night, not any night after. The scene softens now into something quieter. It is April. The kitchen on Calder Street is exactly as Lydia left it. The worn tile, the window above the sink that faces east so that the morning light comes in at an angle her mother had always called the working light, the light for looking closely at things. The bassinet is on the floor near the table, the good one Nadia ordered when she was still pregnant, and Garrett had called impractical. Isaiah sleeps in it with the total commitment that only very young children manage, his small chest rising and falling with the reliability of something that has decided simply to continue. Nadia is at the table, in her mother's chair, the one with the worn armrest on the right side where Lydia always rested her elbow when she read. The framed parcel map is no longer on the wall. It is on the table, laid flat in front of her, the way you lay a deed when you are reading what you own. She has been looking at it for a while, not studying it. She knows every line by now, every parcel boundary, every pencil notation in her mother's hand. She is simply looking at it the way you look at something that took 40 years to build and ask nothing of the world but the patience to remain. She presses her palm flat against its surface. The paper is cool under her hand. Steady. This story is not about what was taken from Nadia O.C. Whitmore. It is about what was never findable by the people who thought they were taking it. The most powerful things in this story, the land, the trust, the love her mother spent 40 years preparing, were never visible to the people who underestimated her, because those people only looked for what announced itself. They never learned to read what stays quiet and holds. Some of you listening know exactly what it costs to stay quiet while someone dismantles the life around you. Some of you know what it feels like to extend patience past the point where patience is being received as love. And some of you know what it means to finally understand the difference between endurance and surrender, and to choose one morning to be done enduring. If this story landed somewhere real for you, leave a comment below and tell me about it. And tell me where in the world you're listening from today. Because this channel has listeners on every continent, and I want to hear from every one of you. Nadia sits in her mother's chair in her mother's kitchen, which is her kitchen now. Isaiah breathes. The morning light comes through the east window at its working angle and falls across the parcel map and across her hand and across the 64 parcels her mother walked and measured and quietly, patiently acquired over 40 years of a life that never once asked anyone's permission to be exactly what it was. The land doesn't argue with anyone. It just stays, and so does she.